Good morning. My name is Andrew Elkins, and I'm the Event and Marketing Manager for the CSUN Center on Disabilities and the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference. I'd like to welcome you to the start of our Wednesday programming. Just a reminder about today's schedule, presentations that are part of our general sessions premiere at 9 a.m., and select sessions will have live Q&A. Make sure to check out our session schedule for more details. Also, our virtual exhibit hall opens at 9:30 a.m., giving you the opportunity to meet with exhibitors and explore the latest technology. Now, it is my privilege to introduce this morning's feature presentation, Accessibility in the Federal Workplace, Section 508 in 2021, presented by the U.S. Access Board. On behalf of everyone at the conference, we hope you find today's content informative and enlightening. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the feature presentation for Wednesday, March 10th, Accessibility in the Federal Workspace. My name is Tim Cregan, and I'm a Senior Accessibility Specialist with the U.S. Access Board. I'm very proud and pleased to be joined here this morning with my colleagues Kathy Eng and Bruce Bailey. Next slide, please. On this slide, the agenda for today's presentation, Accessibility in the Federal Workspace. There are 6 main issues we are going to be addressing. The first is the pandemic, COVID-19, and its impact on the federal workspace. Among the issues raised by the impact of going to remote workplace procedures is going to be the need for accessible communications in government, the importance of accessible meeting platforms and their associated hardware, software, and policies. Also, legal and international developments over the course of the year, conformance and validation efforts in the accessibility area, and finally, accessibility standards. As always, we are fully available to answer your questions both during this presentation and afterwards. Our Access Board website, which will be repeated numerous times, is www.access-board.gov, and we look forward to hearing from you. With that, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Okay, this slide, COVID-19, changes in the workplace. There's 3 images on this slide that do a very good job of summing what has happened in this past year. First of all, on the left is a picture of the COVID-19 molecule. It is a large gray sphere surrounded and covered by what appear to be red. They look like little tufts of yarn, but that is the picture of the molecule that we've seen for the last year worldwide. From that COVID-19 image to our right are 2 slides. One is an image of people wearing face masks, a crowd of people who are socially distanced apart from each other, wearing face masks to avoid transmission of the virus. Below that is a 3rd image of an individual sitting at his computer screen. He is alone, but as you can see in the graphic depiction, he is connected to hundreds, thousands of colleagues around the world through the internet. He's working on remotely. So these are the realities of COVID. Group interactions were not recommended. Everyone has to protect themselves, but you still have to get work done and you have to work remotely. What were some of the considerations? Next slide, please. So in the federal workplace, there are specific ICT issues that we had to address. First issue was, how do you work remotely full time? What does that involve in terms of accessible hardware, software? How do you address accessibility features for accessibility platforms? And finally, what are the other concerns that had to be addressed? Issues such as security, how to obtain and use equipment from home or from a non-workspace environment, and what policies need to be addressed in that context. We will review some of those issues today. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the important things was that information transmitted during the pandemic needed to be accurate, but it also needed to be accessible. It needed to be provided in multiple formats for users. And so one of the first things that happens was that agencies needed to be aware of that, and they needed to make sure that their policies were reflective of that need. So one of the things that the accessibility community did was to provide content and guidance on how to produce accessible content. And a group called the CIOC Accessibility Community of Practice produced guidance documents on how to create accessible agency communications. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is called Making Agency Communications Accessible to Everyone. That is the name of the guidance document that was prepared, issued, and released by this federal working group. And it was developed by the Chief Information Officers Council, CIOC, working with the Accessibility Community of Practice, the ACOP, which is a subcommittee of the Chief Information Officers Council. The leadership team on that subcommittee, as well as the General Services Administration government-wide IT accessibility program, develops this guidance. The full text of the guidance may be found at http://section508.gov/blog/making-agency-communications-accessible-everyone. When reviewing this guidance, it is important, as an overall tip before you start reading it, is to take a look at the Section 508 accessibility standards. Specifically, you should look at the scoping provisions in Chapter 2, and you should look at provision number E205.3, which is agency official communication, which lists the 9 categories of required agency official communication. This is a good minimal list of the categories of content that need to be made accessible. Next slide, please. So within the guidance documents, the Agency Accessible Communications Tips addresses different communications formats. The formats addressed are electronic documents, PDFs, web pages, video and virtual meetings, which includes accessible meeting platforms, about which we will speak more later during today's presentation, and social media. All of these can be made accessible, and this guidance document contains suggestions as to how that may be made possible. We found that this was helpful to federal agencies because, again, having to work remotely and have to do all of your work from a distance was not something that they had previously addressed. Now, moving on from the communications issues, let's move to the next slide. We talked about security. Security is a very key issue in the federal workplace. Like many other online entities, we have to worry about hacking and security, make sure that information is contained. So today, this week, during CSUN, there is indeed another featured presentation on this very topic. It is called National Security and Accessibility, exploring the challenges and opportunities associated with information and communication technology in the intelligence community. And that will be held this Friday, March 12th at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be representatives from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who will talk about information technology, accessibility improvement efforts, and their experiences as IT accessibility users. Our presenters will include Dr. Paula Briscoe of DNI, Daniel Hetrick of NSA, Mr. Deborah Kushner of ICA, Ms. Shannon Pascal, who is known to the 508 community since she is a 508 program manager at Defense Intelligence Agency, and Mr. Michael Waschjaw, acting IC from the CIO's office. Okay, so that is the security issue. Next slide, please. The issue of policy, equipment, and also attitudes about remote telework. So in the federal government, we have many agencies. Each agency has a unique culture, and each agency has its own way of conducting and doing business. All agencies have our unique security needs and privacy concerns. And depending on the business needs of the agency, those are executed and formatted in different ways. The point is, it's very difficult to have a universal approach to all of this because it needs to be adapted to the concerns of each agency. So with regard to telework, telework is now much more accepted generally across government because of the improved technology and the necessity for it. One agency noted that because of remote work done and the fact that the agency made an effort through the acquisition of equipment and software and telework friendly policies, their productivity actually increased 20% over the prior fiscal year. So this has resulted in more telework policies being implemented across government, and even individuals who previously may not have chosen to telework found that it became a necessity for doing their jobs. But having said that, there are some agency functions that will always need to be performed on site. And it's understandable that there will be different approaches taken for those types of jobs. But for the jobs that can be made accessible, we will be talking about that, and my colleague Kathy Eng will be talking in more detail about those considerations. But what is true that improvements in technology will only continue. Next slide, please. Okay, so very briefly, before COVID versus after COVID. Before COVID, you could say that telework was sort of a question of situational. It occurred when it occurred, but it was not a uniform practice. Now, it's arguable to say that telework is the new normal default because most people are not in their offices, particularly in the DC area because of COVID restrictions. So it is more frequent to telework. While accessibility may not have been as much of a focus before, now there's a better appreciation for accessibility as essential. People have discovered that meeting platforms need to be captioned. There needs to be audio descriptions so that people can fully participate in meetings. Also, the use of assistive technology is crucial. Where formerly meetings were only usually in person, and you had all the limitations of budget, time, getting people there, and whether or not people could participate in the meetings due to disability or need for assistive technology. Now that meetings are virtual, there's fewer limitations on budget and time and distance. And for disability, people can more often find assistance with addressing their assistive technology needs. Finally, productivity was subject to limitations previously in terms of limiting it to a 9 to 5 day. Whereas now, with remote conferencing, you have much more flexibility in scheduling. Okay, so this has been an overview of some of the basic issues in the federal workplace. And now I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Kathy Eng, who will be talking about accessible meeting platforms. Kathy?
Thanks, Tim. Next slide, please. I'm Kathy Eng, and I am a senior ICT accessibility specialist with the U.S. Access Board. The spotlight on virtual meeting platforms got very bright a year ago, unexpectedly. I'm going to talk about our experience in the federal government as it relates to accessibility. Next slide. In response to the pandemic, most, if not all, of the federal government started full-time telework. And the federal government is the US's largest employer. To give a very rough estimate, including everyone that works for the federal government, that's employees, contractors, and grant recipients, we're talking about over 9 million workers, according to a 2019 report. Those of us in DC, which is about 15% of the federal government employees, are mostly office workers. And for most of us, teleworking every day was not the norm. When we had meetings, we may have had the option to join virtually or by phone, but if it was important, most of us would attend in person. When the full-time telework started, the scramble for virtual meetings and communication pointed to Microsoft Teams, since most of our government computers were Windows-based and we had Microsoft Office. Close to 1 million employees were told, start using this new application with limited guidance. You can imagine how that went. By the end of the first week of Feds going virtual, our 508 listserv started getting very busy with postings and exchanges about the accessibility issues in Microsoft Teams. This 508 listserv has membership of anyone interested with a .gov or .mil email address. So it includes people from across government. Issues raised were related to questions about navigation in Teams by keyboard and screen reader users, screen share accessibility, how to include real-time captions, how do you display sign language interpreters and participants who sign. Some seemed to have MS Teams features that others didn't. So many questions, not enough answers. And every person or agency could have contacted Microsoft's Enterprise Disability Answer Desk individually. But given the accessibility issues were so numerous and widespread among all disabilities, a meeting with Microsoft would be more efficient and effective. So the accessibility community of practice, which Tim mentioned a bit earlier, ACOP, and the General Services Administration, or GSA, coordinated a meeting for federal agency representatives and Microsoft's accessibility team. It was tremendously helpful to have this open communication because it gave agencies an opportunity to express their challenges and for Microsoft to respond directly. That MS Teams meeting was in mid-May, and Microsoft collected all of the discussed issues. Some were identified as accessibility issues, but many could be addressed by training. Within a week or so, the limitation of how many participants could be displayed in an MS Teams view was removed. This made it possible for multiple sign language participants to see and be seen by the sign language interpreters. Within a few months, automatic captions were available in the latest version of Microsoft Teams. By June, Microsoft was hosting multiple trainings dedicated to accessibility for Teams, Office, and Windows for government enterprise users. Separate trainings were provided for vision, hearing, and cognitive disabilities. Since those trainings were made available, I haven't seen much chatter of accessibility issues with Teams on our 508 listserv. I believe the solutions to address our issues raised during the federal accessibility community were made available to other Microsoft Teams versions and users, so everyone could benefit from the improvements. Next slide. One of the perks of the pandemic, if you can call it that, was the discovery by many that productive telework is possible and virtual meetings are effective. The most obvious benefit is no travel, which is nice for everyone, but for a person with a disability, not having to worry about accessible travel, like requesting a wheelchair accessible car to get to a meeting location, is a relief. And since you're not going to a physical meeting room, someone with a vision disability doesn't have to worry about finding that meeting room, or if the room is wheelchair accessible, or where the accessible entrance to get into the building is. Since everyone is attending the virtual meeting on their own equipment, each person can personalize their virtual experience. Meeting attendees have their own assistive technology that is already configured for their use, their own keyboard, mouse, headset. Their computer's display preferences are already set. It's like cooking in your own kitchen instead of going to a friend's kitchen where you don't even know where the spoons are. The meeting application also identifies who is speaking, which is very helpful for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. If you want to enable captions just for yourself, you can. You can get everyone in the meeting to talk louder just by turning up the volume on your computer speakers. Sharing a file in an in-person meeting often meant projecting the file on a wall or TV so everyone can see it in the room. But usually someone's head's in the way, the room is too bright, so you have to close the shades, or the people in the back of the room can't see because it's too small. Screen sharing in a meeting app puts the content right in front of each meeting attendee, who can move the monitor closer if they need to. And if the file was shared in advance, they can open the file themselves in the native application and access it with their assistive technology. Another benefit for everyone, and particularly helpful for the accessibility world, are the feedback modes available during a meeting, such as slow down, chat. You can ask people to talk louder. What's the link for captions? You can raise your hand to speak. And when people talk at the same time, nobody understands anything. So raising your hand to speak makes a meeting more orderly, which helps the sign language interpreters, captions, and really everyone in the meeting. Next slide. We have bi-monthly webinars, and Bruce is going to give you a bit more detail about the CIO Council webinars later. One of the most well-attended ones was the Accessible Virtual Meeting Platforms, originally broadcast in July 2020. Please check out the archives if you're interested in learning much more about what I'll be able to cover today. It's full of great information and what to look for in meeting platforms. The following best practices are helpful for everyone as we continue using virtual meeting platforms in our daily work practices. Announce your name before speaking, especially when screen share takes up most of the screen, or if someone's video profile doesn't identify their full name. It helps everyone know who's talking. This is particularly helpful for attendees who have vision or hearing disabilities to identify the speaker. Turn on your video when you're speaking. This helps others know who's speaking and also helps anyone who finds lip reading beneficial. If you're planning to screen share a file during a meeting, try to send it to the meeting attendees in advance. This helps with meeting prep, but also allows attendees to view the file in their native application, which is more accessible than the screen share feature. And as a presenter, describe what is on screen so people can follow your screen share activity. For example, I'm going to say on page 4, I'm going to enable track changes. Instead of just typing, I'm going to announce what I just typed. If you have someone attending who needs captions as a reasonable accommodation, get a real-time captioner. Don't rely on the automatic captions because they usually aren't accurate enough. You've probably seen some caption fails online, which are horribly inaccurate and sometimes even embarrassing. So for public and work meetings, misunderstandings due to inaccurate captions are not acceptable. Make sure the captions are right for anyone who needs it. Finally, this isn't a best practice, but a requirement for federal agencies. Section 508 requires captions for any synchronized media that is available to the public or agency official communications. And virtual meetings are video and audio, so they are synchronized media. Back to Tim.
Thank you, Kathy. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm now going to speak about some legal developments during the past year. Next slide, please. Okay, so first we'll start off with legal developments in the United States. We have a case involving accessible kiosk. In this case was a settlement amongst the parties. And so what we will talk about is the release that was requested and agreed upon between the parties. The case is Irving versus Berryhill. It was filed in the District Court for the Southern District of California, and it was settled in March of 2020. The parties were the National Foundation for the Blind, individuals who are also low vision, and the Social Security Administration. As part of the settlement, there was an agreement that there would be a focus on making kiosk accessible. Section 508 already requires that kiosks that are federal ICT shall be accessible, but this settlement was reinforcing that. In addition, it required that such features as Braille, audio descriptions, headphone jacks, privacy safeguards would all be the focus of training for personnel, and that there would be testing for functionality and monitoring of the equipment. So all of this was the settlement agreement, and it will take place, it will become effective in 2021. Next slide, please. Legal developments internationally. Just some highlights. In Canada, our neighbors to the north, we have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which contains a number of deadlines to be reached by Canada up through 2025. Also, the Accessible Canada Act, which talks about removing barriers by 2040. Separate and apart from that, in Europe, the European Union has now passed a web accessibility directive. This is significant because this is now a piece of legislation which can require that any standards or any efforts to support accessibility will be accessible, because now there is a mandate under the law to do so. So all public sector websites must conform starting in 2020. Mobile applications have to comply, and they have to start reporting on their compliance for public websites in 2021. And part of that event also in the EU is a continuing discussion as to whether the European Accessibility Standard, EN 301549, should become an ISO standard. That is an ongoing discussion. Finally, in Switzerland, the Swiss accessibility standards were updated to include WCAG 2.1, and they're promoting e-accessibility. So this is just a brief overview of what's going on internationally. Next slide, please. International collaboration between the United States. Two examples are with an entity called Shared Services Canada, which is part of the Canadian government, which supports government accessibility programs. And what they do is they share government practices with federal government agencies in the United States. Bruce, Kathy, and I, as representatives of the U.S. Access Board staff, we have been meeting with Shared Services Canada, along with colleagues from the General Services Administration and other colleagues involved in the CIOC Accessibility Community of Practice, to share best practices with Shared Services Canada. One of the issues we've most recently been discussing is how to improve and check that accessibility information provided in procurements, that is government purchases, is accurate. So in Canada, they're talking about the implementation of VPATs, Voluntary Product Accessibility Templates. Those of us who do any procurement work with the US government or with other entities will recognize the term, and we have a great deal of guidance on this on our website, section508.gov. Essentially, the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template is a form that is used as part of the procurement process, which identifies those features of a product which are accessible and how they work. It also identifies any instances where there is issues with accessibility and there may be needs for workarounds. So the interpretation and the implementation of the VPATs is a very important issue in Canada, as it is in the United States. So we have ongoing discussions with our colleagues to share best practices for that. Also, finally, the EN 301549 European ICT Accessibility Standard. This is part of a continuing collaboration between the EU and the US. The standard, first draft of the standard was published back in 2014, and the European standard and the US Section 508 standards harmonize with each other. That doesn't mean that they're exactly verbatim, word for word, but what it means that their provisions do not conflict with each other. So obviously, to do that, the EU and the United States work closely together on language and wording. It's part of our continuing collaboration, and it's part of the discussion. There have recently been discussions about potentially proposing the European standard as an international ISO standard. That discussion is ongoing, and the Access Board will provide more information on that as it becomes available. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to conclude on my overview of legal developments with a newly enacted law called the Department of Veterans Affairs Website Accessibility Act of 2019. The brief background: this was approved right at the end of 2020, December 4th, 2020. It's the text of a bill, S3587, 116th Congress, which ran from 2019 to 2020. The full text of the bill may be found at http://congress.gov/bill/Senate-bill/Congress/Senate-bill/3587/text. Next slide, please. The details of the legislation. So this is a bill which has 4 parts. First of all, the first thing it will do, it will require the Veterans Administration to conduct a survey or a study of all VA websites. That study must be completed by June of this year, by June of 2021. So the VA has 6 months or 180 days to conduct a survey of all of their websites. Secondly, they have to submit a report to Congress on that survey by September of 2021 of this year. Now, the report will be directed specifically to veterans committees in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and it will contain the following information. First, it should list all the websites that are not in compliance within the VA, and it should also discuss what needs to be done to remediate those websites to make them conformant with the Section 508 standards. Secondly, the VA is being asked to identify any barriers to completing that conformance. So if there is a question, for example, of insufficient numbers of personnel at the VA to do the work, that is listed as a barrier. The intent of the Act is to try to identify the problem and also to identify what resources may be necessary to address it. Finally, the Act contains definition section. And in this case, it defines websites as files attached to a website, a web-based application, and a kiosk at a medical facility of the VA. Now, having spoken to our colleagues at the Veterans Administration, they are obviously in the early stages of the planning and the logistics for the implementation of this law. And we hope to bring you further updates as more information is known. But this will be a very interesting use of improving the implementation of Section 508 in a major federal government agency. Now, with that, I would like to turn this back over to my colleague, Kathy Eng, who will talk about Section 508 testing. Kathy?
Thanks, Tim. This is Kathy again. So I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about 508 conformance testing. Next slide, please. So what's on this slide is a very high-level overview of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. The Section 508 standards are technical accessibility requirements for ICT, which is information and communication technologies. ICT includes electronic documents, web content, software, and hardware. And Section 508 incorporates the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. These are success criteria from the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, and are recognized internationally as the accessibility standards for web. Next slide. Section 508 is mandatory for federal agencies. ICT that is procured, developed, maintained, or used by agencies shall conform to the revised 508 standards. A key phrase in the scope is shall conform. But how do we know when something conforms? We have to test it. But for 20 years, since the original 508 standards were released, we have had challenges with getting consistent, accurate Section 508 test results. Interpretation of standards vary among different federal agencies and different testers. We all want ICT to be accessible, but what does it mean to conform to the standards? We have a few options when it comes to how to test. There's manual testing techniques, which include using assistive technology and code inspection. Here, a human does the testing and determines test results. So test results will depend on who is doing the testing. There are many automated testing tools available for web testing, and each of these tools has their own rules to determine test results. So test results depend on which tool is being used. Some agencies only rely on automated tools, which can only test about 30% of the Section 508 requirements. That means 70% of the ICT's conformance is unknown and probably not conformant. Accidental accessibility is very rare. Then there's a hybrid methodology, which is a combination of automated and manual. This combines the fast evaluation of automated testing and the human judgment of manual testing. With all of this variety, we get test results that are inconsistent from one test process to another. And federal agencies struggle with being able to trust test results because we don't know where these results came from. Next slide. So the ICT testing baseline for web was developed to establish consistent and accurate testing for 508 conformance, regardless of who does the testing. Interpretation of the standards is key to establishing testing requirements. And to be fully transparent of our standards interpretation, the requirements are described and documented in the baseline. All of the revised Section 508 web requirements are included. This is essentially WCAG 2.0 with some 508 requirements for media players. For each requirement, the properties that need to be checked to determine conformance are detailed. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the Web Baselines table of contents. It's not important to read through each one. I'll try to describe it as best as I can. There are 24 baseline tests. Each of these tests represents a category of testing so that all applicable requirements related to that category are grouped together. For example, there are categories for testing based on what a tester may encounter on a web page and what is required. So if there are forms on a page, baseline 10 describes everything to look for when testing forms. Next slide, please. And just to continue with the forms example, the baseline test for forms is probably one of the more complicated tests for Section 508 and WCAG conformance because there are so many applicable success criteria. This baseline test identifies the 8 WCAG success criteria and provides instructions for what to test to make sure all success criteria are tested. Next slide. And here's the big picture of what we're planning to achieve with the testing baseline. When test processes are in alignment with the ICT testing baseline, they will produce consistent test results for all Section 508 requirements. For web testing, we have the trusted tester methodology from Department of Homeland Security as the first baseline aligned test process. We're hoping to identify baseline aligned test processes that include automated tools to handle the tests that can be done automatically and quickly. But we know that automated tests cannot effectively test all requirements, so a hybrid methodology is needed for baseline alignment. Next slide. The IC testing baseline for web is completed and publicly available on Section 508 coordinators www.github.io/ICT testing baseline. One of our projects right now is to provide a way for existing web conformance testing methodologies to verify their alignment to the baseline. To see our progress with the alignment framework, please check out a CSUN session on this topic titled Section 508, ICT Testing Baseline and Alignment Framework. There you'll learn a lot more details about our efforts to produce more consistent and reliable testing for Section 508 conformance. You can get in touch with the Baseline Working Group either on GitHub or by email. ictbaseline@gsa.gov is the address if you have questions or are interested in learning more. Next slide, please. The ICT testing baseline for web is the first of many for what we are calling the ICT testing baseline portfolio. Our plan is to develop a baseline for all ICT covered by Section 508. Like the baseline for web, each baseline in the portfolio will establish the foundation of understanding for consistent test process results. In addition to the actual baseline, there will be a way to validate that test process is aligned to the baseline. In addition to developing the web alignment framework, we have concurrent efforts to develop the hardware testing baseline and baseline test reporting requirements. We also plan to develop a software testing baseline, a baseline for authoring tools, documents, and more. So we have lots to do, but the goal again is to establish more consistent and accurate 508 conformance testing. One of the test processes developed to align with the ICT testing baseline for web is the Department of Homeland Security's Trusted Tester. It is a manual test process that utilizes the ANDI testing tool that was developed by the Social Security Administration. I'm sorry, next slide, please. So DHS hosts the Trusted Tester training and certification exam online and provides students support as they take the training. Did I mention the training and exam are free? Yes, they are free. There are about 1,700 certified trusted testers today who have successfully passed the certification exam. DHS also created how to use ANDI videos, and these are available on section 508.gov/test/web-software/ANDI-training-videos. These are brief videos about a minute long on the different modules of the ANDI tool and a great way to get familiar with the testing tool used in Trusted Tester. The latest version of Trusted Tester is 5.1, which was released in January of this year. And it's available on github.com/section 508 coordinators/trusted tester 5.1. If you have any questions about Trusted Tester or its free training, please contact DHS's Accessibility Help Desk at accessibility@hq.dhs.gov. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Kathy. My name is Bruce Bailey. I'm an IT specialist with the Access Board. I'm going to be talking about accessibility standards and segueing into one other topic and then taking us out here. Next slide, please. So first up, I want to talk about the WCAG and its evolution, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and remind folks that back in 1999, WCAG 1.0 was published, and some, but not all of the priority 1 checkpoints ended up being used in the original 508 standards in 2000 under 1194.22. What, in my experience, what many people don't realize is how closely adapted those several checkpoints were. 11 out of 16 of our provisions are nearly verbatim from those priority 1 checkpoints. And I'll give you an example. So 1194.22a a text equivalent for every non-text element shall be provided. WCAG 1.0, checkpoint 1.1, provide a text equivalent for every non-text element. So literally the only difference is shall be provided at the end instead of provide at the beginning. They're very, very close. WCAG 2 was heavily influenced by these revised, by the original set of 508 standards, and WCAG 2.0 evolved and incorporated not only the 5 missing provisions of 1194.22, but also some of the priority 1 checkpoints that didn't make it into the original 508 standards were also looked at closely. And in fact, WCAG 2.0 was well enough crafted that we were able to incorporate it by reference in revised 508 standards in 2017. So we don't even repeat it, we don't reprint it, we just incorporate by reference. It's the closest adaptation that a federal agency could do with somebody else's standards. WCAG 2.1 was the WCAG 2X series was updated. WCAG 2.1 was published in 2018. Current work is, it adds a number of good success criteria, especially oriented toward mobile and issues for addressing cognitive disabilities. Work continues and is ongoing. The WCAG 2.2, the last working draft was in August of 2020. It's going to be published soon as a final technical report, a final version by the end of this calendar year, I'm sure. The URL for those is stable, so I can give you that here, w3.org/tr/WCAG22 for whatever the last current vetted version is. And then there's also you might have noticed it heard in January, there was a pretty big announcement that WCAG 3 came out for its first call public working draft. There's lots of sessions on WCAG 2.2 and 3.0 at the CSUN conference. So if this is a topic of interest to you, I very much encourage you to attend those. This WCAG 3 project was formerly known as Silver. I want to start off with the evergreen URL for that, w3.org/WAI/WCAG3. So that was a good landing page that will always be used to distribute information about the current development of WCAG 3, which again is ongoing, and it will be years. On that page, notice that it's an unfinished draft. So it's very much a work in progress. Still going to be called WCAG. Now it's the W3 accessibility guidelines. It does not deprecate, meaning it does not deprecate the 2.x series, meaning the 2.1, 2.2 when it come out is still the most recent version. And those are the versions that you should use for conformance modeling while paying attention to what is going on in WCAG 3. And then a question we get frequently and came in on the question queue for this session is, well, when is the Access Board going to adopt 2.2 or 2.1 or WCAG 3? And what I can say is there's no plans to do so. It's a little bit of an interesting dilemma for the Access Board, because right now the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group is updating these web standards like every 18 months is the target. And it takes us probably 2 years to update 508, at a minimum. So it's would be very tricky for us to catch up. So we have no plans to issue an update for 508 to do that. But if you want to track whatever the Access Board is up to, I want to encourage you to go to the reginfo.gov website, and use that for any regulatory setting agency. I see I'm going to have to accelerate my pace here. Next slide, please. So one of the other pieces of legislation that I want to talk about is the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act, or what was called the 21st Century IDEA. I'll give you the public law number, 115336. If you put that into govinfo.gov, you can get the full details. It's also available on digital.gov/topics/21st-century-IDEA. An act to improve executive agency digital services and for other purposes. This was a great boon for accessibility because the very first set of requirements in section 3, section 1 is like the title, section 2 some definitions, section 3 starts off with the requirements, and the very first thing listed under website modernization 1A or A1 is that websites are accessible to individuals with disabilities according to section 508. So great to have that reinforcement, just less than a couple years after we came out with revised standards. Lots of other things in that in that statute, many of them directly related to accessibility. For example, using forms, using digital signatures, both which are better for people that are using assistive technology than, say, paper forms or wet signatures. The last thing I'll mention on there is compliance with something called the USWDS. Next slide, please. So the USWDS is the US Web Design System. You can find that at designsystem.digital.gov, a design system for the federal government. We make it easier to build accessible, mobile-friendly government websites for the American public. And this has had tremendous influence on federal websites in the past couple of years. We featured them recently on November 24th, 2020, on our CIO webinar series, creating accessible websites using US Web Design System and the 21st Century Digital Experience Act. And go to our archives, accessibilityonline.org, all one word, accessibilityonline.org/CIOC-508-archives for more information there. Next slide, please. So not the least of why this project is dear to my heart is that we used it to revising, completely migrating, complete new hosting service with the Access Board website. So if you want to get a sense for what USWDS includes, I think our site is a good model of that. So new and different, get to use all kinds of some of the widgets that you'll find across federal governments about how this is an official federal agency. Also using this hero tag about upcoming events. Next slide, which we're using for today. We launched a whole new experience for the Access Board, an online forum over at IdeaScale with partners of the Departments of Transportation and elsewhere. We're focusing on inclusive design of autonomous vehicles. So that's going to be access-board.gov/AV. Pete Buttigieg is kicking us off today at 2 o'clock. So it's great. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about some trends very quickly, what we see coming up this year and next. Next slide. Telework is going to continue, increase in use of accessible and importance of that meeting rooms are accessible. The strategic planning for improving 508 management is going on. Standards work is going on. Lots and lots of good moving parts. Want to highlight our session on where we talk in the OCIO series about the 508 revised standards and our experience the past couple of years. Part 1 was in January. Next slide, please. We're going to have the follow-up on this on part 2 in March, the end of March 30th, the end of this month. These 508 series are every other month, January, March, May, July, September, November, always at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. And again, this is a collaborative ongoing project of the Accessibility Community of Practice of the Chief Information Officers Council and the Access Board. And again, accessibilityonline.org/CIOC-508/archives. Next slide, I want to mention a couple presentations at CSUN that are with our very esteemed colleagues. Yesterday, there was a program on 508 ICT testing baseline and alignment framework at 9 o'clock. That Kathy mentioned this one. And the great thing, of course, is these are all archived. So while you're in CSUN, it doesn't matter that this one happened yesterday. After the seminar, you can go take a look at that right now. And then immediately following the session is 508 questions and answers in 2021. That's today at 9 o'clock Pacific, 12 noon Eastern. The session's discussing the implementation of the standards and provides revised guidance on using Section 508 technology requirements and acquisitions, development, section testing, and evolving technologies. And next slide, please. Competing with that is another one going on at exactly the same time, but again, they're recorded. So that's the magic of a virtual conference. You don't have to choose which you don't have to, you can do everything. So 508 accessibility through the acquisition life cycle, best practices. on how federal agencies procure information community technology that is accessible under 508. And then finally, the Friday's featured presentation, Tim mentioned this on slide 8, about the national security and accessibility, exploring the challenges and opportunities associated with information communication technology in the intelligence community. The IC, as they refer to themselves, of course, has many, many brilliant minds. Some of those brilliant minds, might not be able to see, might have trouble hearing. Very important to include those assets in our intelligence community. Next slide. I want to give us a couple minutes for chatter. One of the best practices we're not able to figure out the logistics on is how to get our slides to you. So please, section 5, we have an email address. Part of our job responsibility is taking questions, answering questions about 508, about WCAG, since that's referenced by our standards, 508@access-board.gov. And in particular, if you want to get our slides, that's the correct email to hit us at, 508@access-board.gov. And with that, I will ask Tim or Kathy if they have anything else they want to add.
Thank you, Bruce. This is Tim again. And as you've noted, we had a lot of material to cover during this 60 minutes. And we welcome follow-up questions from you. And we have a very, very short period of time. So we did receive a couple of questions before the session. We'll try to answer it very, very quickly. So one of the questions was, what accessibility considerations have been made for more emerging and future technology, such as XR, mixed reality, in the form of AR and VR, virtual reality, as these are being integrated in virtual workplaces to make them more immersive and connected feeling? How will people with disabilities be included? Okay. Excellent question.
Well, this is Kathy. I covered this a bit in a previous presentation, so I'll try to just kick off our response. So for people who aren't aware, there's virtual reality, which is full immersion, and augmented reality, which is a combination of reality with mixed reality. And all of this technology is actually kind of covered already in Section 508 with our hardware requirements, software requirements, and maybe even, the WCAG web requirements as advances in technology make more and more possible with web. So it's things to consider individually in what is involved in your XR technology. If it's hardware, we've got an entire chapter in Section 508 dedicated to hardware. We have software requirements, and it's important to take a look at each aspect of the technology. We have operable parts requirements, display screen requirements for sound, and perhaps audio descriptions, depending on the interface and the interaction that the user experiences. But one of the things, to keep in mind is that the real world wasn't built to be accessible to everyone. And this is a real opportunity for our XR developers and creators to develop a world that is fully accessible, and remove the barriers to the users of this virtual world. And it's a great opportunity. Start with the requirements, but don't stop there. Keep going. I read an article a few years ago about one of the developers adding sensors for a virtual reality cane. And it's just a thought for all of you, the emerging technologies. Incorporate accessibility from the start. It makes it easier for your end product to be accessible if you think about it from the beginning.
I'll mention, Bruce, I'll mention, it's not a new problem. I did a presentation in Second Life like 20 years ago with Judy Brewer of the W3C. So, people have been working on this for quite a while. Currently, there's some work on trying, in particular, to address captioning in VR environments. So trying to provide some of those technical details.
And this is Tim. We will be having the CIOC webinar on March 30th, where we will be discussing this very issue in further detail. Go to the Access Board website at access-board.gov to register for our CIOC Section 508 webinar. It's free.
Awesome. Just leave you with our email address, 508@access-board.gov. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of CSUN. Thank you very much.
Pete Buttigieg.
Secretary of Transportation.
Bye, and thank you very much.
Bye.